Okay, so hello and welcome to our discussion today. We want to look at training needs assessment, right? So our topic for discussion today is training needs assessment. And we want to be describing the importance and scope of training needs. Then we look at the methods and techniques of training needs assessment. We will also explain the training needs assessment process. And then finally, we'll look at the organizational and operational analysis. So basically, this is what we'll be looking at for today. So to introduce us to our discussion for today, if training has to be relevant or if training has to be cost effective, then it is important that it meets the needs of the organization, right? So in terms of the organization's target population, it's important that the training meets the needs of that organization. So training just for the sake of training is meaningless or is pointless. And it's important that if training is to happen and training has to be effective, then it's important that who will receive the training is taking note of, right? It's important to know who is going to receive the training. So training for the sake of training is pointless, and the planning of who is going to receive the training is very, very important, right? It is also important to plan how much they will receive and when they will receive the training. Okay, so considerations of who will carry out the training and the facilities that the company has at its disposal are very important factors in the planning phase of every training session. However, the obvious first step has to be the formulation of a training policy. All right. So once you have a training policy formulated, then you know that you are started, okay? And for that training policy to be successful, then it should come from the highest level of the decision making in the organization. So what this means is that for training to be successful, it should come from the management of the organization. It should come from the top people in that firm, right? So those who make the decisions at the highest level should be the ones that would initiate the training process or should come up with a policy that will guide training in the organization. So what then are training needs? If we say training needs refer to the gaps, or a training need is the gap between the knowledge, the skills and attitude required against the knowledge, skills and attitude already possessed by the trainee. So what this means is that if we want to look at training needs, then what we are assessing is the gap between what the employee already has against what we expect the employee to have. So if you look at all the skills and the expertise and the knowledge that the employee has against what we expect the employee to have, then that gap is what you refer to as the training need. So training needs exist at all levels of an organization. And it is only the emphasis of one or the other aspect which changes. Okay, so whether you are a new employee or someone who has been on the job for a long time, no matter who it is, there's by all means going to be some gap that requires training. Okay. And there are three major areas in which every staff or every employee displays the gaps, all right? Or if we say someone is displaying a gap, what it means is that they are not meeting the job requirements. So the person already has some skills and some expertise, but what you expect them to do is such that what they already have is not able to accomplish what you expect them to do. Okay, so there are times that people's performance, if you look at their performance in the present position, it does not match the required standards, or when the requirements of the job changes due to unchanged or due to the changed circumstances. Sorry. So when the requirements of a particular job changes due to the changed circumstances, and then when the present job ceases to exist, or the job holder changes jobs, thereby creating new gaps in the new job. So in every organization, at every time, there's likely to be a gap that has to be filled by training. And this gap is what you refer to as the training need. Okay, so if you look at this figure, it shows when there is the existence of a need, and we have said that um there's a gap or there's a training need if you notice performance deficiencies. Okay, so if you notice that someone is performing on the job, but what they are doing is not as effective as you want it to be. Okay, so where individuals' knowledge and their skills, all right, or their skills and knowledge of the group, or the attitudes of the individual, the attitudes of groups, or the behaviors of groups, teams, all right? The facilities or the work culture is such that there's a change, or if a particular job discipline experiences a shift, or there's a change, or new equipments are introduced, or if you notice that the management is not as effective as it has to be, or there are changes in organizational policies. All of these are such that they are going to affect the performance of employees. Okay, and when this happens, it means that there is a gap or there is a need for training, and so you have to initiate the process, or you have to start planning for training. But first, there should be that need that has been identified, and it can be identified from any of these. It can be a knowledge gap, can be a skills gap, it can be a gap in the way a team performs its functions. Okay, but by all means, there should be the existence of a need. Then you can plan training. Okay, so training needs assessment or checking the organization to identify gaps, right? That's what you call the assessment of training needs. Training needs assessments provide information on where training is needed. Okay, so if you perform a training needs assessment, all you are doing is looking for the various points in the organization where there's the need for training. Okay, you also look out for what content of the training is needed, what the content of the training should be, and who within the organization needs training in certain kinds of skills and knowledge, right? So when you are doing an assessment of training needs, you are looking out for where a particular training is needed, what the training should contain, all right, and who the training should be for. Okay, basically that is it. So there are several methods and techniques of training needs assessment. You have the training needs survey, right? You can also have competence analysis. You can have a performance appraisal approach. There's the task analysis approach, the feedback approach, and then the management decision approach. So we'll take them one by one and discuss. The first one is the training needs survey, all right? And this is the most commonly technique that is used for training needs assessments, all right? And even though this is the most common technique that is used, um, it is effective, and however, since this approach is based on opinions or the views of people, its effectiveness will largely depend on the quality of the survey. So this technique requires that you administer a questionnaire or you conduct a survey, right? And the effectiveness of whatever results you will get is dependent on the quality of the survey that was conducted, right? So the survey is designed and conducted to collect the opinions or organizational culture affecting performance, affecting educational skill, and attitudes of the personnel. Okay, you also look at the organization's impact on resources, the willingness of the bottom, and intentions of the top. All right. Simply put, you put together a questionnaire, and the questionnaire will contain questions that will help you to identify gaps in what an employee is currently doing and what you expect from them. Okay, so the survey of training needs must define the present needs, the future needs, individual needs, organizational needs, job requirements, and job performance level, in-house training, managerial plan, right? So there are several questions that the questionnaire will contain. So you have employees fill the questionnaire, right? And then based on the responses that are given by each employee, you analyze, and then you're able to know where they need training, right? So next is the competence analysis. And the competence analysis, we say, is a relatively quicker method. So unlike the administering of a questionnaire for the survey, the competence analysis is a quicker method to identify the training needs. And what this does is it combines both the survey and the study of specifications. Okay, so here the views of self means the employee himself or herself, the supervisor or subordinates about skills, their knowledge and attitudes are collected for a particular post or position. And to remedy the deficiency, suitable training needs are identified. So what this entails is that views of employees, views of supervisors, okay, or major stakeholders will be taken about a particular role and what is expected for the role, right? So as all of these are brought together, then it would indicate which areas require training for the employee. Okay, so as you put together these views from the employees, from their supervisors, from subordinates, you are able to identify areas that require training in the organization. So this approach gives a broad and relatively inexpensive analysis, right? Because you just gather the views of major stakeholders, and then based on the views that they have come up with, you identify a gap between what is already being done and what has been collected, okay? And it helps in prioritizing the skill and knowledge that the training needs. Okay, so you're able to put together what is required, and then you are able to come up with the specific training that is needed. It can, however, be a little controversial in some of the organizations because it may leave some areas of doubts and prejudices which may affect the correctness and its assessment. So there are times that people will not be objective about the information they give you. So if what they are telling you is not the exact information that you need, what it means is that at the end of the day, even though you are collecting views and opinions from stakeholders, you are not getting the correct thing. And if someone has an issue with another employee's role, then they are going to come up with information that will harm the work that that person is doing. Okay, so sometimes the competence analysis can be controversial. Then you have the performance appraisal approach. This is the relatively accurate approach for individual training and development needs. Okay, what happens is that you analyze the knowledge, the skill, and the job requirements for each of the positions that are available in the organization, or each of the roles that are performed in the organization. So management does this analysis, checks what knowledge is required, the skills that are required on the job, and all of that. Okay. And then based on this approach, you check the performance of employees. Okay, so this approach starts after defining the criteria and the standards to measure or compare the performance with. So before you are able to succeed with this performance appraisal approach, you should have a baseline that states what is required for every employee at their various positions. Okay, so that based on what you have, you'll be able to measure the current performance of employees, and then you compare to what is expected of them. If there are gaps, then it means that there's the need for training. Okay. The main aim of this approach is to find out whether employees on the given work or positions have the required knowledge and skill to do it appropriately or not. So that's all you want to check. You want to check and see if the skills and experience of a particular employee meet what you have documented as the expected work that has to be done. Okay. So when this is done, even newcomers, though they have inventory of knowledge and skills, are required to improve performance, and they need training. Then you have your requirements, okay, based on which you give the training. So you can have, in this case, the job description, which is your document that states what is expected of every employee, versus the job performance of the employee. Okay, and this provides sufficient data to identify the training and development needs. Okay, so that's for the performance appraisal approach. Then you have the task analysis approach. The task analysis, basically what it does is to pick any task in the organization and see what goes into the performance of that task. Okay, so sometimes an individual works effectively so long as he's performing on his own. But when he has to work with others, okay, or when the work that the person is doing involves other people, then his efficiency is reduced. Okay, so there are people who would, if they are working alone, they are very efficient. They put in all the work that has to be put in to accomplish whatever task they have been given. But if you put them in the team, or if you put that same person in a team, what happens is that they relax and they are no more as productive as they would have been. So task analysis exposes this weakness, okay, in dealing with others and his attributes to make him capable of running a group or performing a task effectively. So if you perform a task analysis, what you do is it helps you to identify that this particular employee is effective when he's working alone. But when it comes to working in groups, he is no more as effective as he's supposed to be. So when you perform the task analysis, you identify this, and then you are able to give training for that employee, a training that will help him to be as effective as he would be if he's working alone. So the same effectiveness he would put in if he's working alone is the same effectiveness that the organization will get if he's working in a group when he gets the required training. Okay. So this is the most comprehensive yet useful approach to identify training needs. Okay. So task specifications and the competence desired to perform the task precisely identify the needs. Okay. Even though this is more objective and output oriented, it takes time and skill, right? You need a lot of time and skill to be able to perform the task analysis. But once this is done, it is more objective and output oriented. Okay. The next one is the feedback approach. And the feedback approach is one that is used in most of the organizations. Okay, so here the feedback or information regarding the necessity of training and development in a particular department or for a group of people or individual will be coming from maybe a report. Okay, could be the annual report or maybe a production report, performance report, or even the comments of the employees, supervisors, or managers, or even comments from their peers or their colleagues. It can also be comments from subordinates. Okay, so based on feedback or comments or reports, okay, from all of the stakeholders in the organization, it will inform the kind of training that an employee needs. So, for example, if someone is working in a manufacturing company, right, and that person is producing beverages, okay, if at the end of the period there are maybe 40% of the productions or 40% of the products are such that they have defects and so they cannot be sold, what it means is that that report that shows that 40% of the products that were manufactured have gone waste, that report shows that there's the need for training. Okay, so this is the feedback approach where you have feedback from the major stakeholders. Could be from your boss, subordinates, from your peers, from an annual report, from a financial report, from any of these sources that give feedback on an action that has been done. Okay, since the above sources of information are otherwise obligatory in an organization, it means that whether they are looking for a training need or not, these reports will be produced anyway. You realize that the approach or the feedback approach is one that is not expensive. So this approach is inexpensive and the fastest way to identify the training needs. However, it can be ineffective. So even though it is inexpensive, it can also be ineffective, okay, because it does not reflect on the other factors or the group. So it could be that the defects in the products, the 40% defect that we identified, could be that it is not the fault of the employee. Maybe the equipment he's using is not the best. Okay, so what we are saying is that the feedback approach can sometimes not be very effective, even though it is one that is not so expensive. Then you have the management decision approach, which is used by most small organizations. Okay, so in organizations which are not so big, you realize that the management decides who has to be trained and what the training is for. So in this case, no, they don't really perform any needs analysis, right? Top management, based on what they have observed or based on what they have seen or based on what they are anticipating for the future, would recommend that an employee goes through training. And these decisions are based on future planning or a career growth plan or the deficiencies in the employee's work. Okay, and most of the times these are what top management have observed. Okay, and the sources of information may be from reports, like we said earlier, or a direct interaction with the employee. So sometimes you will be called for a meeting, and based on how the discussions go, or based on the conversation you have with top management, they can prescribe a particular training for you. Okay, this approach is also not expensive because you don't have to administer any questionnaire. You don't have to depend on anyone to give you information. It's just top management observing and then taking a decision. Okay, so the approach is not expensive. However, it may not have the support of justification documents or a recorded present performance and achieved performance level for measuring the change. So for the management decision approach, it is sometimes difficult or mostly difficult to know if after a training there has been a change. Okay, so you may not even know that someone has gone through training because the gap was not clearly defined. Top management just recommended that they go through the training. All right. And that takes us to the training needs assessment process. Okay, so it has 3 steps. The first is to design the training needs analysis process. Then you conduct the needs assessment, after which you process the data. Okay, so in designing the training needs analysis, what you do first is to have data. Okay, data that will help you to define the need. So for this data, you need the desired level or your expected outcome, okay, as well as the actual level of performance. So you need what the employee is currently doing versus what you expect them to do. Okay, so you have to produce a document of the desired level of performance, and then you now measure the actual level of performance. Okay. Then you also need data that will help to identify the solution, right? So you have to come up with information on the kind of training that is required, the source of training that is available to meet the need that you have identified. Then you also have to collect data to specify those who require the training. So at the individual level, you have to identify the various employees who need the training, okay? And then at the organizational level, you look at the groups of people who require the training. Then you also need data to provide the planning details for delivery of training. And normally this data is obtained in the process of gathering data, okay, in the first 3 areas. So whilst you are defining the needs and identifying the solution or specifying those who require the training, then you are also gathering data to provide the planning details for delivery of the training. Okay, so whilst you are putting together the first 3, then you are also getting information for the last one. Then you go to the conducting the needs assessment itself. Okay, and here it requires that you have the support of management. If management is not in support of a particular training program that is being planned, then it's not possible that the training will hold. Okay, so you need to get the explicit support and backing of top management. Then you also have to explain how to use the instrument. So for example, if you are conducting a survey, you need to explain to the employees how the instrument works so that everyone understands how to make use of it. They also know what to do with the questionnaire. Otherwise, you would distribute questionnaires and people don't really know what to do with the documents that you have shared with them. Then you also have to explain the purpose for which you are gathering data and why it is important. Okay, sometimes people feel that you are gathering data on their weaknesses so that they will be maybe demoted or taken out of their current position or any reason they amount to. You should be able as an HR person to explain or to let them understand or get the purpose for which you are collecting the data and why that data you are collecting is important. If they know the purpose, then they will give you the right information that you're looking for. Then you also emphasize the need for frankness and thoroughness. Okay. And where it is appropriate, you have to ensure the anonymity of whoever is giving you the information that you are collecting. Okay, so that if the information they are giving you is not really good, it's not as though they'll be seen as bad people in the sight of whoever they gave the information about. Okay, so ensure that you let people feel comfortable, let them know that they can be frank as they can be. They should also be thorough. Okay, and as much as possible, ensure their anonymity. And then the last step is to set definite time frames for the return of the data you are collecting. Okay, so you are collecting the data, ensure that you give them timelines. Otherwise, people will take your questionnaire and they will not return it. So set the time frame on when the data should be returned. Then you go to the processing of the data or analyzing the data that you have collected. So once you have identified the various needs, then you need to make a decision as to how those needs will be met. And these decisions for allocating training resources should be logically based on a determination of the relative importance of the different training needs. Okay, so after conducting a survey, for example, you'll notice that a lot of gaps will be identified. What this means is that there'll be a lot of training needs in the organization, but resources are also limited. So you cannot provide all the training at once. So at this point, you have to analyze the data you have and check which of the training is of topmost importance. So you have to be able to prioritize which one should be given first and then which one should be given at a later time, because you cannot meet all the needs at once. Okay, and there are 6 basic factors that should be considered in setting priorities for meeting the training needs. You have to consider the impact of the training, right? The scope of the training, the organization's policy, right? Then the time you have available. Then you also want to look at the type of need that you have identified and how feasible it is to provide the given training. So based on these factors, you can prioritize which of the trainings should be given immediately and the ones that can wait until when the organization is ready or when the organization has enough resources to provide that training. Okay, so this shows a model for training needs assessment. And the first is to determine the purpose, right? So you should be able to determine the purpose for which you want to identify gaps in the organization, right? So if you determine the purpose, then you also identify the type of data that you need. The type of data that you need will help you to design the data gathering approach. So it will help you to put together the questionnaire or the interview guide or whichever tool you decide to employ. Okay, so you design the data gathering approach. Then once your questionnaire is ready, you gather data. You send the questionnaires out, employees fill it, and then you collect it back, you analyze and verify the data. Then after you have done all of that, you prioritize because all the needs cannot be met at once. So you prioritize, and then based on the level of impact and all the other factors that were considered, you start giving out the training. Okay. So from the needs that you will identify after analyzing your data, you realize that some of the needs can be classified as present needs, and some of the needs can be classified as future needs. Okay, some of the present needs that you will identify as gaps, okay, are role clarity, clarity of the role that employees are performing, or leadership quality development, or decision-making skill development, or quality consciousness development. You can also have improvement in productivity or behavior reforms. Needs that align to any of these can be considered as present needs. What it means is that they are needs that you should provide training for immediately. Okay. Then there are future needs, and these future needs, you can have technological change, you can have skill development, right? Knowledge of future diversification and change in roles, updating the trade skill knowledge of competent markets, and then career planning and management development plans. You notice that these are long-term needs. So you classify them under the future needs. So for all the needs that you will identify, you can classify them as either present needs or future needs. Okay, so also under the classification of needs, you can have individual needs, occupational needs, and then organizational needs, right? So for the individual needs, you look at the skills, knowledge, and attitudes of the people, okay? And you look at the 3 dimensions of a performer as they contribute to the effectiveness of accomplishing the organization's goals. Okay, so you can have, among the individual needs, you can have supervisory skill development, managerial or executive development, and then decision-making needs. All of these are needs at the individual level. Then you have needs at the occupational level. And this need requires fulfilling the competence gap to perform quality output. Okay, breaking the barriers of interpersonal group effectiveness, developing competence or confidence to take up challenges and initiatives. Okay, and then what you do here is that you develop teams or groups of people, and you ensure that when people are working together, they are as effective as if they are working individually. So you have individual needs, then occupational needs, where you have the group needs, and then you have organizational needs, where it's important that the organization provides goods or services with excellence. Okay, so it's important that employees or people who work within the organization work with some level of excellence. So for people who are not meeting this need, all right, as such that they are not meeting the needs of the organization, so then there's the need for counseling them or training them to ensure that the work they do comes with some level of excellence. So you can also classify the needs at the individual level, at the occupational level, and then at the organizational level. Okay. So once we are done with the assessment, then you have the organizational and operational analysis. Okay, so here McGee and Thayer, they introduce a framework for understanding the needs assessment process. And they identify 3 critical interrelated components. You have organizational analysis, operational analysis or task analysis, and then person analysis. Okay, so for the organizational analysis, like we have said, you look at the objectives, analysis of the organization's objectives, okay, resources that are available and how they are used, okay, how resources are used. Then you have a scan of the environment, all right, and then you also have a scan of the organizational climate. Then you also have the task or operational analysis. And this is a detailed examination of a particular job or what a particular task entails, right? Its various operations and conditions under which it has to be performed. Okay, so here you look at the performance standards required of employees, the tasks that they have to discharge, and the methods they will employ on the job, as well as how they have learned such methods. Okay, and this will help you to also identify the gaps, but this is based on the task that they are performing. Then the third one looks at the manpower analysis or the person analysis. Okay, so here you look at whether what the employee is doing is satisfactory or not satisfactory. Okay, and it helps you to know where performance is poor or where the person is doing well on the job or where a particular job requires replacement. Okay, so you have analysis at the organizational level, at the operational or task level, and then the manpower analysis. Okay. So there's also what you call the training forecast, right? And this is where people try to predict the training needs for the future. So any changes in the future will usually bring about training needs. So research will have to be carried out to be able to forecast developments in the future. So based on what you anticipate will happen in the future, you can perform a training needs analysis. And this function is always least tackled in the training needs analysis, especially in companies that employ no training specialists. So where line managers responsible for their own internal training often fail to set aside time to review their future needs. So for most organizations who don't contract specialists to perform their training needs analysis, in most of the cases, they focus on the present needs of the organization and they lose sight of their future needs. Okay, so some future needs will force a company to train or retrain its employees. And some of these are like in a case where the company has to expand. So where there has to be an expansion or promotion if an employee is promoted, or where there's a reorganization of the firm, or there are changes in seasons, new methods of doing things come up, or there's a change in the layout, or new equipments are installed, where you have special jobs, new products, changing or changes in the manning levels, right? Or change in the manpower. So for if you had 5 employees and now you have reduced to 3 employees, or you have increased to 10 employees, it will require training or retraining, right? And then in cases of retirement and attritions, all of these are situations that will call for training, but they will be for future needs. Okay. All right. So, like we have said already, and as we have discussed earlier, a training needs analysis is a data gathering process that is used to identify and compare an organization's actual level of performance to the projected or desired level of performance. So the difference that you have from the present and what is expected will identify the immediate or long range training needs. So whether you have an immediate training need or a future training need depends on the difference that you will have. Okay. And the performance can be interpreted to new managerial behavior or technical skills that are required to do a particular job, right? So if you look at the relationship between the two dimensions, you realize that for all of them, there's a discrepancy. If the training is an immediate training need, then there's a discrepancy between the current desired level of performance and the actual level of performance. Okay, so that discrepancy is the immediate training needs, right? And where you have long range training needs or future training needs, then what it means is that the discrepancy is as a result of the actual level of performance against the desired level of performance. Okay, so one has to do with the desired level of performance against the actual level of performance, and the other one has to do with the actual level of performance against the desired level of performance. So in all of those cases, you realize that there will be a training need. In one case, it will be an immediate training need, okay? And the other one has the long range training need. So for the immediate training needs, the discrepancy is between a current desired level of performance and the actual level of performance. And then for the long range training needs, the discrepancy is between the actual level of performance and the projected or desired level of performance. Okay, so thank you very much. This has been a lot, but when we meet, we will discuss in detail. I believe that when we are discussing, all your questions will be answered. So note the questions as you listen, and then when we meet, we can discuss all the areas of concern. Thank you very much. Bye bye.